Hello and welcome back, guys. We're now starting a part 2 of Deku the World's Strongest Swordsman, written by Animelovernewguy. You can find author's profile link in the description. Let's begin. The wind howled through the narrow streets of the bustling city, carrying the salty scent of the distant sea. The sun had dipped low, casting an orange glow across the horizon, but on a rooftop far above the city's chaos, a young boy sat, his legs dangling carelessly over the edge. Izuku Midoriya, only 5 years old, seemed out of place. While children his age played in the streets or ran around laughing with friends, Izuku spent most of his days alone. There was something about being up high, looking down at the people below, that filled him with a strange sense of peace. As if he could see the world from above, untouched by the struggles and noise of the everyday life around him. His green eyes, usually wide with wonder, held a depth that suggested a different kind of wisdom. Sometimes, he would sit for hours, his mind lost in thought, staring off into the distance. His mother, Inko, often found him in strange places, perched on rooftops, watching sunsets from the highest trees, or standing by the edge of the cliffs, his eyes scanning the horizon like a hawk searching for prey. At times, Izuku would hear strange thoughts that didn't feel like his own. Flashes of memories that seemed far too old for a child of his age, and in those brief moments, he would catch glimpses of a man, a swordsman, standing alone, his dark eyes as cold as the deep sea. The man's name was Mihawk, and he wielded a sword larger than anything Izuku had ever seen. It was black as night, with a jagged blade that seemed to shimmer even in the absence of light. In the moments when these memories would surface, Izuku felt something stir inside of him, a power, a presence, and an undeniable sense of strength. But when the memories faded, Izuku was just a boy again, confused and unsure of what it all meant. He couldn't explain it to his mother. How could he? How could he tell her that he was haunted by visions of a life he had never lived, that his dreams were filled with the ghost of a man who wielded a sword like no other? Midoriya, his mother called, breaking his thoughts. Dinner's ready. Come inside. Izuku blinked and shook his head as if to clear it. With a small sigh, he climbed down the side of the building, his small hands gripping the rough brick with ease. It was strange how comfortable he felt up there, so far removed from the world below. As he jumped to the ground, he looked up at the skyline, the distant city lights twinkling like stars. Somewhere inside him, a voice whispered, "You will be great one day." He couldn't understand why he heard that voice. But somehow, it felt like the truth. Dinner was a quiet affair in the Midoriya household. Inko tried to engage her son in conversation, asking him about his day at school, but Izuku's mind was elsewhere. He was used to her worrying, always asking about his strange habits and the way he would spend hours lost in his thoughts. She didn't know how to help him, not when he was so different from the other children. "Izuku," she said, setting down a bowl of rice. "You've been spending a lot of time alone lately. Don't you want to make more friends? You could join a club or play with the other kids." Izuku paused, his spoon halfway to his mouth. He had never been interested in clubs or the chaotic noise of children his age. He didn't know why. He simply preferred solitude. It was in those moments of quiet that the memories of Mihawk would return, the sensation of wielding a blade so powerful, it felt as though the weight of the world rested in his hands. "I'm fine, Mom," he replied softly, his green eyes distant. Inko frowned, her gaze filled with worry. "I just don't want you to feel lonely, Izuku. You don't have to be alone all the time." Izuku's eyes flickered with something sharp, something that resembled a deep understanding far beyond his years. "I'm not lonely," he said quietly. "I don't need anyone else." Inko stared at her son, a strange unease settling in her chest. She couldn't put her finger on it, but there was something about him that was different. Something that went beyond his quirk, which had yet to manifest fully, and into the very essence of who he was. The way he looked at the world. The way he moved, so fluid, like someone who had been trained for something greater. By the time Izuku turned 6, his quirk manifested in an unexpected way. Like most children, he had been eagerly awaiting the moment when his latent power would awaken. But when his quirk finally did show itself, it was nothing like he had imagined. Rather than the flashy or overwhelming abilities that many other children had, Izuku's quirk was one of precision, a hyper-focused sense of awareness. He could perceive the smallest details around him, and his reflexes were enhanced to the point where it felt like time slowed down when he was focused. At first, his mother didn't understand it. She had hoped for something that would help Izuku become a hero, but his quirk didn't exactly fit the traditional mold. But Izuku knew, deep down, that this ability was only a glimpse of something greater. His senses were sharpening, he could feel the weight of his body with incredible accuracy, and his movements were becoming smoother, more controlled. It wasn't just the quirk. It was something else. Something more. It was as if the memories of Mihawk, of the man who wielded the great sword Yoru, were slowly starting to seep into his very being. The precision, the control over his own movements, the cold calm in the face of danger, it all felt familiar to him. Like it was his destiny to wield that sword again. One afternoon, while playing with a stick in the park, Izuku's instincts kicked in. The way the wind rushed past him, the way the stick felt in his hand, it all aligned in that single, perfect moment. He swung the stick with a fluid motion, cutting through the air with precision. And then, as if it had always been there, he struck, thwack, hitting a nearby tree with such force that the bark splintered and cracked, the sound ringing in the air. Izuku froze. He hadn't meant to do that. His hand was still gripping the stick, but his heart raced with a strange excitement. He had never felt this before, this overwhelming sense of power, the sharpness of his senses, the certainty of his movements. It was as if Yoru had called to him, its presence inside his mind a reminder of who he had been. And who he would become. Later that evening, as he lay in bed, Izuku closed his eyes and let the memories flood back. The sensation of the sword in his hand, the weight of it, the way it felt like an extension of his own body. His heartbeat quickened with each passing memory, each vision of Mihawk's cold, calculating eyes, his unrivaled skill, and his mastery over the blade. Izuku knew then that he was not just a boy with a quirk. He was the reincarnation of something far greater. A legacy had been reborn inside him, and whether he liked it or not, he would one day carry that burden. And so, as the moon rose high in the night sky, Izuku made a silent vow to himself, I will become the greatest, just as he was. The Hawkeye had returned. Chapter 2, The Awakening of the Blade. The years passed by quietly for Izuku Midoriya. The strange boy who had once been unsure of his place in the world was slowly growing into something more, something different. While his peers grew up chasing flashy quirks, Izuku spent most of his time alone, honing his unusual abilities. At first, his quirk had been a source of confusion. Unlike the explosive powers many of his classmates possessed, his ability was precise, too precise. He could detect the smallest movements, predict the slightest shifts in his environment. His body responded instinctively, but it wasn't until he turned 12 that Izuku began to make sense of it all. One evening, after finishing his homework, Izuku slipped out of his house and made his way to his usual training spot on the rooftops. The sky was painted with the last colors of the setting sun, casting long shadows over the city. Izuku's green eyes shimmered with an intensity that had become all too familiar. Another late night, a familiar voice called from below. Izuku's mother, Inko, was standing at the window, looking up with a mix of concern and affection. Izuku looked down at her and smiled faintly. Just a little longer, Mom, he called back, his voice filled with quiet determination. I'll be back soon. Inko sighed, but she knew there was no changing his mind. For years, she had watched Izuku become more distant, lost in his own world. It worried her, but she could never bring herself to stop him. He was different, there was a part of him that couldn't be explained, a part she couldn't understand. But she loved him all the same. All right, just be careful, Izuku, she said, her voice soft with concern. I will, he promised, turning back toward the horizon. As he did, a strange sensation filled him, almost as if the world had grown still, waiting for something to happen. It wasn't just the quiet evening or the faint whisper of the wind. It was something deeper, something within him, calling to him. Izuku closed his eyes, feeling the familiar pull inside his chest. It was like the memories of Mihawk were becoming clearer, sharper. The sword. The strength. The legacy. He reached for his wooden practice sword, gripping it with both hands. The air around him seemed to hum in response, and a faint thrill ran through his body. "You're ready now." The voice was sudden and powerful, and though it startled him, Izuku didn't flinch. He had been hearing whispers like this for years now, echoes of Mihawk's presence. The voice felt familiar, as if it had always been there, but Izuku had never been sure whether it was his imagination or something else. Today, though, he was certain. Ready for what? Izuku muttered aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. His eyes were fixed on the distant horizon, as though he were speaking to someone on the other side of the world. "Who are you?" "You know who I am." The voice seemed to resonate in his chest, deep and steady. "I was once the greatest swordsman. And now, you must take my place." Izuku gripped the sword tighter, his hands trembling slightly. It wasn't fear, it was something else. Something like recognition. "I can't," Izuku's voice faltered. "I'm not ready." "You have always been ready." The voice was unwavering, confident. "This is your fate. This is why you were born." Izuku stood still, his mind racing. His heart beat faster. Was it possible? Could he really be? Before he could think too much, he raised the sword. His stance was firm, his focus sharp, and as he swung it through the air, it felt natural. The motion was fluid, precise. His quirk, his instinct, guided every movement, like he had been doing this for years. It was more than just physical training, it felt like his very soul had come alive in the motion. He swung again, harder this time. The wind howled around him as his wooden sword cut through the air. The city below was nothing more than a distant hum now, his senses heightened, attuned to the smallest detail. His quirk was a tool, but it was Mihawk's presence within him that truly shaped his power. After several more strikes, Izuku stopped, breathing heavily. His muscles burned with the effort, but there was a feeling of accomplishment, of completion, as if the sword had answered his movements. It wasn't a mere weapon, it was part of him. A weapon meant for someone greater than a simple child. "Is this really me?" Izuku muttered to himself. His heart pounded in his chest, not out of fear, but because of the strange certainty that had filled him. He didn't need to ask anymore. He was meant for this. Later that night, as Izuku sat at the edge of his bed, his mind raced with the weight of the memories he had just uncovered. The legacy of Dracul Mihawk, the greatest swordsman who had ever lived. The quiet whisper of his presence still echoed in Izuku's mind, a constant reminder that his life was about to change. Inko knocked gently on the door before stepping inside, her face painted with a concerned smile. "Izuku, you've been training hard lately. Is everything all right?" Izuku hesitated, his green eyes reflecting the storm of thoughts racing through his mind. "Mom," he began quietly, "I've been thinking a lot. About who I am, what I'm meant to do." Inko sat down beside him, her hands folding in her lap. "I know you've been distant, Izuku. But if there's anything you want to talk about, anything you need, you can always come to me." Izuku's lips parted as if he wanted to speak, but no words came out. He wanted to tell her everything, the truth about his strange dreams, about the memories that weren't his, about Mihawk's voice that whispered to him in his sleep. But no words could fully express what he was beginning to understand about himself. "I'm not like the others, am I, Mom?" Izuku said at last, his voice trembling. Inko's eyes softened. "Izuku, you're my son. And you are special in your own way. I don't always understand what you're going through, but I know you have a kind heart. You'll find your path." Izuku nodded slowly, but there was an unsettling feeling in the pit of his stomach. He wasn't sure what path he was meant to take. Was he meant to become a hero like everyone else? Or was his path something else entirely? The following days were filled with intense practice and reflection. Izuku's swordplay grew sharper, more precise. His body responded with the grace and fluidity of a MSTR, despite his age. His quirk was the perfect tool for his training, allowing him to move faster, anticipate his strikes before they even happened. But even more than that, the memories of Mihawk, the sharp eyes, the silent composure, the vast ocean of power, were becoming more real with each passing day. One afternoon, as Izuku practiced in the local park, a group of children from his class approached. They watched him from a distance, their eyes wide with curiosity. "Hey, Izuku," called one of them, a boy with messy brown hair. "What are you doing? You've been out here all day." Izuku paused mid-swing, lowering his wooden sword as he turned to face them. His classmates often wondered why he was so serious, so isolated. They didn't know him like his mother did, or, perhaps, they didn't want to. "I'm just practicing," Izuku said quietly, a slight smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Practicing?" the boy asked, raising an eyebrow. "For what?" Izuku's expression softened. For something important." His green eyes grew distant as he spoke, as if the weight of his own words had begun to sink in. He wasn't just practicing for school or to be a hero. No, his training was for something greater. Something far beyond what they could understand. One of the other children glanced at the sword, his face a mixture of awe and confusion. "That's a lot of work for just a hobby. Why don't you just join us in a game of tag?" Izuku shook his head slowly. I don't think I can. My path is different from yours." The words felt foreign as he said them, but deep down, Izuku knew they were true. He didn't belong to the world of ordinary children with ordinary quirks. He was different. And perhaps that difference would one day make him the greatest swordsman the world had ever known. As his classmates wandered off, Izuku turned back to his practice, feeling the weight of his destiny growing heavier with each passing moment. The Hawkeye was awakening. What to call it months passed, and Izuku Midoriya's life settled into a pattern of relentless, solitary training. While others his age chased their dreams of heroism or honed their quirks, Izuku withdrew, consumed by an intensity even he couldn't fully explain. His mother, Inko, watched with growing concern. Izuku had always been a quiet boy, but this silence carried weight, as if the world inside him had grown too vast to share. Izuku couldn't find the words to explain the strange sense of purpose that drove him. How could he? The vivid memories of Mihawk, the greatest swordsman to ever live, weren't just visions. They were lessons etched into his soul. His quirk had amplified his reflexes and movements, but it was Mihawk's ghostly teachings that refined them, transforming instinct into precision. One evening, Izuku practiced on the rooftop of their apartment. The city stretched below him, bathed in the golden hues of dusk. His practice sword, a simple wooden blade, whistled through the air with calculated strikes. His movements were fluid, each swing sharper, faster, more deliberate than the last. And then, the voice came again, clear and commanding. "The time has come." The words froze him mid-swing, his breath catching. He turned sharply, but the rooftop was empty. Yet, the voice reverberated within him, undeniable and heavy with purpose. "I'm ready," Izuku whispered, though no one was there to hear him. He had felt this call growing louder with each passing day. His life had been leading to this moment, and there was no turning back. The next morning, the weight of his decision pressed down on him as he sat across from his mother at breakfast. The quiet tension in the room was almost unbearable. Inko's worried eyes searched his face, sensing the change in him but unsure of its cause. "Mom," Izuku began, his voice steady but low, "I'm leaving." The words landed heavily in the room, and Inko froze mid-sip of her tea. "Leaving? Izuku, what are you talking about? Where would you even go?" Her voice trembled with fear and confusion. Izuku hesitated, gripping the edge of the table tightly. I don't know how to explain it, but I need to find something. I need to find Yoru, Mihawk's sword. It's calling to me, Mom. I can't ignore it anymore. Inko stared at him, her expression a mix of shock and disbelief. Izuku, this is madness. You've been training so hard, and I'm so proud of you. But you're still just a boy. You can't go off chasing a sword from some dream. What if something happens to you? Izuku met her gaze, his green eyes filled with determination. I've trained for this. My quirk, my skills, they're more than just tools, Mom. They're a part of me, guiding me. I don't expect you to understand, but I have to do this. If I don't, I'll regret it forever. Tears welled up in Inko's eyes. She knew her son's resolve was unshakable, just as she knew she couldn't protect him from the world forever. Promise me, she said softly, her voice breaking, promise me you'll be careful. I promise, Izuku said, his heart heavy with the pain he was causing her. But this was his path, and he had to follow it. That night, under the cover of darkness, Izuku left. His backpack was light, carrying only essentials and his practice sword strapped to his side. He moved quietly through the sleeping city, his steps purposeful and steady. The faint glow of streetlights cast long shadows as he made his way to the edge of town. Stopping at a hill overlooking the city, Izuku turned for one last look at the place he had called home. His mother's tearful face lingered in his mind, but he pushed the thought aside. There was no turning back. The call of Yoru, and the legacy of Mihawk, was too strong to ignore. 3 weeks passed as Izuku traveled through forests, mountains, and villages. The journey tested him in every way. He fought off thieves, helped weary travelers, and sparred with seasoned swordsmen who challenged his skills. Each encounter honed his abilities further, shaping him into a warrior far beyond his years. Eventually, Izuku reached the coast. The vast ocean stretched before him, its waves crashing against jagged rocks below. The salty wind whipped through his hair as he stood at the cliff's edge, staring out at the endless horizon. The pull of Yoru was stronger than ever, a magnetic force drawing him forward. I know you're out there, Izuku whispered, his voice steady despite the enormity of the task ahead. I'll find you. I'll become the greatest swordsman. He closed his eyes, feeling the rhythm of the waves echo in his chest. The world seemed to hold its breath as if acknowledging his vow. When he opened his eyes, there was only clarity. His path was set. Far away, back in the city, a shadowy figure stood on a rooftop, gazing at the horizon. His sharp, calculating eyes gleamed with interest. So, the Hawkeye awakens again, the figure murmured, a smirk tugging at his lips. Let's see how far you can go, little swordsman. The figure disappeared into the darkness, but his words lingered in the air, carried by the wind. The world was shifting. And Izuku Midoriya's journey was just beginning. The cold spray of the sea kissed Izuku's face as he stood on the ship's deck, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The fishing boat, a modest vessel with patched sails and the pungent smell of brine, was far from the grand ships he had envisioned for this leg of his journey. Yet, it served its purpose. The sailors on board were grizzled men with weathered faces, and though they didn't understand the young boy's obsession with crossing the ocean, they didn't ask many questions. In exchange for passage, Izuku worked alongside them, hauling nets, scrubbing decks, and even helping prepare meals. Each night, after the day's grueling work, Izuku would retreat to the bow of the ship. Beneath the pale light of the moon, he practiced with his wooden sword. The sailors, amused at first, soon found themselves mesmerized by his dedication. His strikes were crisp, his footwork impeccable. Though the blade in his hand was ordinary, the boy moved with the precision of a MSTR swordsman. You're something else, kid, grunted the ship's captain, a burly man with arms like tree trunks. He leaned against the railing, watching Izuku's nightly ritual. What's driving you so hard, huh? You training for a war? Izuku paused mid-swing, sweat dripping down his brow. He turned to the captain, his expression serious. I'm looking for a sword. A legendary one. Yoru. The captain let out a low whistle. Yoru, ha. That's not just a sword, boy. That's the stuff of legends. You know what they say about it. Izuku nodded, gripping his wooden blade tightly. That it's the strongest sword in the world. That it was wielded by a man no one could defeat. The captain said, his voice dropping to a whisper. But it's more than that. They say Yoru chooses its MSTR. You don't just find it, it has to deem you worthy. And those who aren't worthy, he drew a finger across his throat. Izuku's stomach tightened, but he didn't flinch. I'm ready, he said firmly. Whatever it takes, I'll prove myself. The captain studied him for a moment before nodding. You've got guts, kid. I'll give you that. But guts alone won't get you far in this world. Remember that. The days turned into weeks as the ship made its way across the vast ocean. Izuku spent his time training, observing the sailors, and listening to their stories of far-off lands and dangerous seas. He learned about pirate crews that ruled the waters, treasure hunters who would do anything for riches, and islands shrouded in mystery. One story, in particular, caught his attention, a tale of an island where swordsmen gathered to test their mettle, said to be a place where legendary blades had been forged and lost. Do you think Yoru could be there? Izuku asked one of the sailors eagerly. The man shrugged. Who knows? But if you're looking for swordsmen, that'd be the place to go. Just don't expect a warm welcome. Izuku's resolve only hardened. He knew the path ahead would be dangerous, but the call of Yoru was too strong to ignore. Late one night, as the ship neared its destination, a storm rolled in. The sea, calm and serene moments ago, transformed into a writhing beast. Waves crashed against the ship with brutal force, and the wind howled like a wild animal. All hands on deck, the captain bellowed, his voice barely audible over the storm. Izuku stumbled out of the cabin, clutching the railing to steady himself. Rain lashed at his face, and the deck was slick with water. The crew worked frantically to secure the sails and keep the ship from capsizing, their shouts blending with the roar of the storm. Kid, get back inside, the captain shouted at Izuku, but he shook his head. I can help. Izuku yelled back, grabbing a loose rope and tying it down. The storm raged on, each wave threatening to tear the ship apart. Izuku's heart pounded as he worked alongside the sailors, his body pushed to its limits. But just as the storm seemed to reach its peak, a massive wave loomed above them, its shadow swallowing the ship whole. Hold on, someone screamed, but it was too late. The wave crashed down with a deafening roar, and the world went black. When Izuku opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was the sky, a soft, endless blue, unmarred by clouds. The storm was gone, replaced by a strange stillness. He sat up slowly, wincing as pain shot through his body. His clothes were soaked, and his practice sword lay a few feet away, half buried in the sand. Sand. He was on a beach. Izuku forced himself to his feet, taking in his surroundings. The beach stretched for miles, bordered by dense jungle on one side and the vast ocean on the other. There was no sign of the ship or its crew. He was alone. He retrieved his sword, gripping it tightly as he ventured into the jungle. The air was thick and humid, filled with the sounds of chirping insects and rustling leaves. Izuku moved cautiously, every muscle in his body on high alert. After what felt like hours, he stumbled upon a clearing. At its center stood a massive stone structure, weathered by time but still imposing. It resembled an arena, its walls carved with intricate patterns that seemed to tell a story. Izuku's heart raced. This was no ordinary island. As he approached the arena, he felt a strange energy in the air, a presence that sent shivers down his spine. He stepped inside, his footsteps echoing off the stone walls. The arena was empty, but the weight of countless battles fought here lingered like a ghost. "Welcome, traveler." The voice was deep and resonant, coming from the shadows at the far end of the arena. Izuku turned, his grip tightening on his sword. A figure emerged, cloaked in black with a long, curved blade strapped to his back. His face was obscured, but his presence was undeniable, a swordsman of immense skill. "You've come far," the man said, his tone unreadable. "But this place is not for the unworthy. Why are you here?" Izuku swallowed hard, forcing himself to stand tall. "I'm looking for Yoru. I've trained my whole life for this. I'll prove myself if I have to." The man tilted his head, as if considering Izuku's words. "Yoru, you say? That is a name that carries great weight. Many have sought it, and many have failed. Do you truly believe you are worthy?" "I don't just believe it," Izuku said, his voice steady. "I know it." The man chuckled, a low, almost menacing sound. "Very well. If you wish to prove yourself, then show me your resolve. Draw your blade." Izuku's hands trembled as he raised his practice sword. He knew it was no match for the man's weapon, but he also knew he couldn't back down. This was the moment he had been training for. The man unsheathed his blade, its edge gleaming like liquid silver in the sunlight. "Come," he said simply. Izuku charged, his wooden sword striking with all the precision and power he had honed over the years. The clash of their weapons echoed through the arena, the force of each blow sending shockwaves through the air. But it quickly became clear that the man was toying with him. His movements were effortless, each strike calculated and precise. Izuku fought with everything he had, but he couldn't land a single blow. "You have spirit," the man said, blocking another attack with ease. "But spirit alone is not enough." Izuku gritted his teeth, his body screaming in protest as he continued to fight. He knew he couldn't win, but he refused to give up. He wouldn't stop until he proved himself. Finally, the man disarmed him with a swift, decisive strike, sending Izuku's sword flying across the arena. Izuku fell to his knees, gasping for breath. "You're not ready," the man said, his voice cold. "But you have potential. Return when you've tempered your resolve." Izuku looked up, his vision blurred by sweat and tears. "Wait. Please tell me where to find Yoru." The man paused, his expression unreadable. "If you survive this island, you may find the answer you seek. But be warned, the path to Yoru is not for the faint of heart." With that, he vanished into the shadows, leaving Izuku alone in the arena. As the sun set, Izuku sat on the arena floor, clutching his practice sword. His body ached, and his spirit was battered, but his determination burned brighter than ever. This was only the beginning. He would survive this island. He would grow stronger. And one day, he would claim Yoru. Shadows of the blade. Izuku sat on the cold stone floor of the arena, his practice sword lying splintered beside him. The moon's pale light poured through the cracks in the ancient walls, illuminating his bruised and battered form. The swordsman's words echoed in his mind, "You're not ready." The man had vanished into the shadows, leaving Izuku alone with his failure. Despite his exhaustion, Izuku couldn't rest. His hands trembled, not from the fight, but from the crushing weight of doubt. He clenched his fists, feeling the jagged edges of his sword bite into his palms. "I'll show him," he whispered, his voice trembling but determined. "I'll survive this island, no matter what it takes. I'll prove I'm worthy of Yoru." The wind howled through the arena, carrying with it the distant cries of creatures that lurked in the jungle. It felt as if the island itself was challenging him. The next morning, the sun rose over the horizon, casting golden light over the dense jungle. Izuku sat by the arena's entrance, carefully repairing his sword with what little he could find. Vines served as bindings, resin from a nearby tree patched the cracks, and a sharpened rock reshaped the blade's edge. It wasn't much, but it was enough. As Izuku tightened the final knot, he noticed something strange. The jungle seemed different this morning, quieter, more foreboding. The usual cacophony of bird calls and rustling leaves was absent, replaced by an oppressive silence. Izuku rose to his feet, gripping his repaired sword tightly. If this island was a test, then it wasn't going to wait for him to catch his breath. The first trial, the silent stalker. The jungle grew darker the deeper Izuku ventured, the canopy above weaving a thick curtain of shadows. The air was heavy and humid, clinging to his skin as he moved. Every step felt like a risk, the silence amplifying his heartbeat in his ears. It wasn't long before he felt it, a presence, just beyond his sight. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as he slowed his steps, his eyes scanning the foliage for any sign of movement. Then, he saw it, a flash of silver, glinting in the shadows. Izuku barely had time to react before the beast attacked. It was like nothing he had ever seen, a sleek, feline creature with midnight black fur and glowing red eyes. Its claws tore through the air with blinding speed, aiming straight for his throat. Izuku rolled to the side, the creature's attack missing him by inches. He scrambled to his feet, his sword raised defensively. The creature prowled in a circle around him, its glowing eyes never leaving his. It moved silently, its footsteps inaudible even on the dry leaves. Izuku knew this wasn't an ordinary animal, it was a predator honed for killing, and it was testing him. He steadied his breathing, focusing on the rhythm of the creature's movements. When it lunged again, Izuku was ready. He sidestepped the attack, bringing his sword down in a sharp arc. The blade struck the creature's flank, drawing a thin line of blood. The beast hissed, retreating into the shadows. Izuku didn't relax. He knew it was still there, watching, waiting for its moment to strike. This time, Izuku took the offensive. He moved through the jungle with purpose, his senses heightened. When the beast lunged again, he was ready. He deflected its claws with his sword and struck back, aiming for its legs. The fight was brutal and relentless, each clash of claw and blade pushing Izuku to his limits. But he refused to back down. With one final, desperate strike, he drove his sword into the creature's chest. The beast let out a low growl before collapsing, its glowing eyes fading into darkness. Izuku stood over it, his chest heaving. Blood dripped from a shallow cut on his arm, but he was alive. He tightened his grip on his sword, a flicker of pride igniting in his chest. The jungle seemed to exhale around him, the oppressive silence lifting. The second trial, the voice in the stone. Izuku stumbled upon the ruins as the sun began to set. Hidden deep within the jungle, they rose like jagged teeth from the earth, their surfaces covered in moss and vines. At the center of the ruins stood a stone archway, its carvings depicting scenes of battle and triumph. The air around it felt heavy, charged with an energy that made Izuku's skin tingle. As he approached, a low voice rumbled through the clearing. Only those with the strength to face themselves may pass. Izuku froze, his eyes darting around for the source of the voice. But there was no one else in the clearing. I've faced plenty, Izuku said, his voice steady despite his nerves. The voice chuckled, a deep, resonant sound. Have you, child? Then prove it. Step through the archway, and face what lies beyond. Izuku hesitated. The air beyond the archway shimmered, as if the space within it were alive. Whatever waited on the other side, he knew it wasn't going to be easy. But he had no choice. Gritting his teeth, Izuku stepped through. The world around him shifted. The jungle faded away, replaced by a barren wasteland under a blood-red sky. In the distance, a figure stood waiting for him. As Izuku approached, his heart sank. The figure was a mirror image of himself, but twisted. His doppelganger wore a cruel smirk, and his eyes burned with malice. Finally, the doppelganger sneered, drawing a blade identical to Izuku's. I've been waiting for this. Izuku barely had time to react before his double attacked. Their blades clashed, the sound ringing out across the wasteland. The fight was unlike anything Izuku had ever experienced. His doppelganger moved with precision and speed, mirroring his own techniques perfectly. Every strike was met with an equal counter, every feint anticipated and blocked. "This is what you fear," the doppelganger taunted, their swords locked in a fierce struggle. "You'll never be strong enough. You'll never be worthy of Yoru." Izuku gritted his teeth, pushing back with all his strength. "You're wrong." The words gave him strength, and he pressed the attack. He fought not just with skill, but with the determination that had driven him this far. This wasn't just a battle, it was a test of his resolve. Finally, with a burst of energy, Izuku disarmed his doppelganger, sending the blade flying from his grasp. His double collapsed to his knees, his cruel smirk replaced by a look of resignation. "You've won," the doppelganger said, his voice softer now. "But this is only the beginning." The wasteland dissolved, and Izuku found himself back in the clearing. The stone archway was gone, replaced by a single path leading deeper into the jungle. The third trial, the blade's call. As the days turned into weeks, Izuku continued to train, pushing himself to his limits. The trials of the island had honed his skills and strengthened his resolve, but he knew his journey was far from over. One night, as he meditated beneath the stars, he felt it again, that pull, stronger than ever before. It was as if the island itself was guiding him. He followed the sensation through the jungle, his steps quick and purposeful. The path led him to a secluded glade, where a stone pedestal stood bathed in moonlight. On the pedestal rested a blade. Izuku's breath caught in his throat as he approached. The katana was sleek and elegant, its black blade etched with crimson markings. He reached out, his fingers trembling as they brushed the hilt. The moment he touched it, a surge of energy coursed through him. This wasn't Yoru, but it was powerful, a symbol of the strength he had gained and the strength he still sought. As he lifted the blade, Izuku felt a sense of purpose settle over him. The trials of the island had tested him, but they had also prepared him. His journey wasn't over. But for the first time, he felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. Chapter 6, the final trial. Izuku's fingers tightened around the hilt of the blade. Its weight was familiar, its dark edge gleaming in the moonlight like a beacon. It wasn't Yoru, the sword he had dreamed of claiming, but it felt like a step toward the power he sought. The island had given him countless trials, each one pushing him further than the last, and now, standing in this glade with the blade in his hand, he could feel something new stirring within him. The moonlit glade was still, the air thick with the promise of the unknown. The only sound was the soft rustling of the leaves, the jungle holding its breath as if waiting for the next chapter of his journey to unfold. For the first time in weeks, Izuku allowed himself a moment of peace. But that peace was fleeting. As he examined the sword, a strange sensation swept over him. The island had tested him in countless ways, but this felt different. There was something more to this sword, something more than just its sleek design or the power it seemed to promise. A deep, resonant voice echoed through the clearing, vibrating the air itself. "The trials are not yet complete, child." Izuku's heart skipped a beat. His instincts flared, his grip on the sword tightening as his eyes scanned the darkness. He had grown used to the silence of the jungle, but this voice was different, louder, more commanding, as if the very island itself were speaking to him. "Who's there?" Izuku called, his voice steady despite the unease swirling in his gut. "You are holding what is not yours," the voice intoned, each word heavy with weight. "That sword is not the key. It is a tool. A stepping stone." Izuku took a cautious step back, his heart pounding. "What do you mean?" "I've fought for this. I've faced the trials. I've proven myself." The voice chuckled, low and rumbling like thunder across a distant horizon. "You've proven you can survive. But survival is not enough. This island is testing not just your strength, but your spirit. Your resolve. And now you face your final test." Before Izuku could respond, the ground beneath him trembled. The trees around the clearing creaked and groaned, as though something immense was awakening within the island. A dark presence filled the air, oppressive and cold. Izuku tightened his grip on the sword, his senses on high alert. He could feel it, something was coming. The air around him seemed to hum with an otherworldly energy, as if the very earth had begun to shift. A shadow emerged from the trees, tall and imposing, its shape barely visible in the low light. As it moved closer, Izuku's breath caught in his throat. The figure was clad in armor, its face obscured by a dark helmet, and in its hand, it wielded a massive sword. The presence of this figure radiated power, far beyond anything Izuku had encountered. He instinctively raised his own blade, knowing that the island's final trial had begun. The armored figure stepped forward, the ground beneath its feet cracking with each step. When it finally spoke, its voice was like the crashing of waves against jagged rocks. "You are not yet worthy, child." Izuku's heart pounded in his chest, his body tense. The figure's words were a challenge, but he wasn't going to back down. He had come too far. "I don't need to be worthy of this sword," Izuku said, his voice unwavering. "I need to be worthy of Yoru." The figure paused, as if considering his words, before it laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed through the clearing. "Yoru is beyond you. But this sword, this is your test. If you cannot defeat me, you will never claim the power you seek." The figure lunged, its massive blade swinging down with terrifying force. Izuku barely had time to react. His quirk flared, his enhanced senses heightening his awareness of every movement. He sidestepped, his body moving of its own accord as his practiced sword collided with the armored figure's blade. The impact sent a shockwave through his arms, numbing them for a brief moment. The figure didn't relent. It pressed its attack, moving with an eerie fluidity despite its heavy armor. Every strike was precise, calculated, each swing aimed at ending the fight in a single blow. Izuku fought back with everything he had. The sword he held, though not Yoru, felt right in his hands, its weight balanced as if it were made for him. He blocked, parried, and countered, using every lesson he had learned on this island, every trial he had overcome, to stand his ground. But the figure was relentless. It moved faster than Izuku could follow, each strike leaving him with less and less time to react. His breath came in ragged gasps, his limbs growing heavy with fatigue. The sword in his hand was a blur, barely able to keep up with the onslaught of the armored warrior. "You are not enough," the figure growled, bringing its blade down in another crushing blow. Izuku staggered back, barely managing to raise his sword in time to deflect the strike. His legs were shaking, his vision blurring from the sheer exertion. Every muscle in his body screamed for rest, but there was no time for that. This was it, the final trial. If he didn't succeed here, everything he had fought for would be for nothing. In that moment, he realized something: this trial wasn't about power. It wasn't about physical strength or skill. It was about his heart, his resolve to push forward, to never back down, no matter the odds. As the armored figure swung its blade once more, Izuku found his opening. He sidestepped and, with a burst of energy, struck with all the power he could muster. His blade connected with the armored figure's, sending a shockwave through the air. The figure staggered, its defense momentarily broken. Izuku pressed the attack, his strikes sharp and precise. His sword moved in a blur, each blow landing with a resounding crash against the armored figure's defenses. The figure staggered again, and with one final, powerful strike, Izuku disarmed it, sending its sword flying into the night. The armored figure fell to its knees, its helmet falling away to reveal its true form, a mirror image of Izuku, just as twisted as the doppelganger he had faced in the second trial. This was no ordinary opponent, it was a reflection of his deepest doubts and fears. "You have defeated me," the figure rasped, its voice now softer, more resigned. "But you still have far to go." Izuku stood over the figure, breathing heavily, his body aching from the intensity of the battle. For a long moment, he just stared at the fallen warrior, his mind racing. And then, as if a veil had been lifted, the clearing began to shift. The dark presence that had filled the air faded, and the oppressive weight of the trial lifted. Izuku's heart slowed, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he felt the weight of his sword in his hand, and the weight of his journey. This was not the end. It was only the beginning. The island had tested him in every way possible. But now, he understood, the trials were not meant to break him. They were meant to shape him, to prepare him for what was to come. As the final trial faded into the distance, Izuku turned his gaze back to the path ahead. The trials had shaped him, but Yoru, the sword he had always dreamed of, was still waiting. It was a symbol, not just of power, but of everything he had overcome. And now, Izuku was ready to claim it. Homecoming and entrance exam. Izuku stood at the edge of the dense jungle, gazing back one last time at the island that had shaped him into something more than what he had been when he first arrived. The memories of the trials, the hardships, and the battles he had fought still echoed in his mind, but they no longer held him in place. He had conquered them, faced his deepest fears and emerged stronger, more determined. With one last glance at the island that had forged him, Izuku turned and began the long journey home. The trip back to his small apartment in Mizutafu felt surreal. The island had been an oasis of raw, untamed power, and now, as he walked down the familiar streets, it almost seemed like a distant dream. The world around him was bustling, filled with the everyday noise of city life, people chatting, cars honking, the sound of footsteps echoing off the pavement. It was a sharp contrast to the silence of the jungle, and for a moment, Izuku felt out of place. But then, his hand instinctively tightened around the sword at his side, and he remembered, this was where his true challenge awaited. The UA entrance exam was just a few days away, and it was the final step to realizing his dream of becoming a hero. The first night back home, Izuku collapsed into his bed, exhausted to the bone. His body ached from the long journey, the battles he had fought, and the wounds he had sustained. But it wasn't just his body that was worn out, his mind was weary too. He had spent so much time focused on surviving the island's trials that he had almost forgotten about the real world waiting for him on the other side. He ran his hand through his hair, staring up at the ceiling. The weight of what was to come settled heavily on him. The UA entrance exam wasn't going to be a walk in the park. He had no doubt that he was better than he had been when he first left for the island, but there were still so many unknowns. The exam wasn't just about power, it was about smarts, teamwork, and composure under pressure. He had only a few days to get his mind back in the game. But Izuku wasn't one to back down. He had spent his whole life trying to prove he was worthy of his dream. And now, with the trials of the island behind him, he was more determined than ever to make that dream a reality. The next morning, Izuku woke up early, the first rays of sunlight filtering through the blinds of his apartment. He had always been an early riser, but today, the anticipation of the entrance exam made it feel like every minute counted. His body was still sore from the island, but it didn't matter. He pushed himself out of bed and immediately started to stretch. His movements were slow at first, his muscles stiff from days of travel and combat. But as he worked out the KNKS in his body, the familiar rhythm of training began to return. After a quick breakfast, Izuku picked up his notebook, the one filled with his meticulous notes about quirks, heroes, and combat techniques. It had been his lifeline before he left for the island, the one thing that kept him grounded when the world around him seemed impossible. He had learned so much about heroes and their quirks, and the trials had shown him what it truly meant to fight for something greater than himself. But now, with the exam looming, it was time to focus on the practical aspects. The entrance exam was just as much about speed and strategy as it was about strength. He needed to know how to read the battlefield, how to make the most of his quirk in a high-pressure environment. And most importantly, he needed to be ready for anything. He opened the notebook and began to review the strategies and combat moves that he had studied. He had spent countless hours studying heroes like All Might and Endeavor, breaking down their techniques, their combat styles. But the island had taught him one important lesson that no book could have given him: how to adapt. The day before the exam, Izuku found himself sitting in his apartment, the weight of everything catching up with him. It wasn't just the exam that had him nervous, it was the life that awaited him after. The island had given him the skills and determination he needed to survive, but now it was time to step into the real world, to take his place among the future heroes of Japan. He gazed out the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink. It was an appealing sight, one that reminded him of how far he had come, and yet, how far he still had to go. But he wasn't alone on this journey. His mother, Inko, had always supported him, and he couldn't forget his childhood friend, who had always believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. He had people to fight for, people who had invested their trust in him. As the evening wore on, Izuku prepared himself. He took out his practice sword and spent a few hours sharpening it, polishing the hilt, making sure it was in perfect condition. It wasn't the legendary Yoru, but it was a reminder of the strength he had earned, the trials he had faced, and the person he had become. He strapped it to his side, just as he had done on the island, and closed his eyes for a brief moment of quiet. Tomorrow was the day he would prove himself to the world. The morning of the UA entrance exam dawned clear and bright, the air crisp with the promise of a new beginning. Izuku stood in front of the school gates, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. Everything he had worked for had led to this moment. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves, but the excitement was impossible to suppress. Around him, other aspiring heroes were buzzing with energy, each one hoping to make it into UA, the prestigious hero academy. Izuku scanned the crowd, watching the sea of students. Some seemed confident, others nervous, but there was a sense of camaraderie in the air. They were all there for the same reason, to prove they had what it took to become heroes. As the students filed into the stadium-like arena, Izuku couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something huge. It wasn't just about passing an exam, it was about starting a new chapter of his life, one that would shape the future of his dream. The exam began with Present Mike, the boisterous hero known for his loud personality and even louder voice, addressing the students. He stood at the front of a massive stadium-like arena, his vibrant yellow hair making him immediately recognizable. "Alright, everyone, listen up." Present Mike shouted, his voice echoing through the stadium. "You've all trained hard to get here, but now it's time to prove you've got what it takes to become heroes. You'll be facing a series of challenges in this practical exam, and we'll be testing your abilities in combat, strategy, and overall hero potential. Don't hold back." Izuku's pulse quickened as Present Mike continued outlining the exam. The challenge was about to begin, and Izuku's thoughts raced. He had faced brutal tests on the island, but this felt different. This was real, there would be no second chances. Suddenly, Izuku heard a familiar, though not entirely welcome, voice from behind. "TCH. You again." Bakugo's voice was as harsh as ever, filled with disdain. He was standing right behind Izuku, his usual scowl on his face. Izuku turned, slightly startled to see his childhood rival so close. Bakugo had always been confident, aggressive, and proud of his strength, but now they were in the same boat, standing on the threshold of the same exam. Izuku felt a strange mix of nerves and determination as he locked eyes with Bakugo, but the other boy wasn't interested in conversation. Bakugo didn't even acknowledge him. He just turned his attention back to the front, his hands crackling with the faint glow of his explosion quirk, clearly ready to show off his power. Izuku, feeling the pressure mounting, swallowed and turned his focus back to Present Mike, who was now explaining the specifics of the exam. "Listen up." Present Mike's voice boomed again. "The UA entrance exam is divided into two parts. The first is a practical exam, where you'll face off against artificial robots designed to test your combat skills and how well you can think on your feet. There are 3 types of robots, villain robots of varying sizes and strengths. You'll earn points based on how well you perform in battle. The larger robots are worth more points, but remember, taking them down is harder. You'll need to make decisions in the heat of the moment. So don't waste time on the small fry if you can't handle the big ones." Izuku clenched his fists, already preparing himself mentally. Robots were one thing, but he had been trained by real monsters. Still, This was a different kind of test, a test of his ability to perform in a public arena, to show he could be a hero, not just survive. And just to make things interesting, Present Mike continued with a grin, you'll also need to rescue civilians during the exam. That's right, there will be a few simulated civilians placed throughout the arena. Protect them, and you'll earn extra points. Fail to do so, and it could hurt your score. Got it. Izuku's mind raced as he absorbed the information. This was it. The exam wasn't just about fighting robots, it was about demonstrating that he had the skills and the judgment to be a true hero. All right. Present Mike called out. Let's get started. Remember, this is your chance to show what you're made of. Don't hold back. As the countdown began, Izuku's heart thudded loudly in his chest. The exam had officially begun, and he knew that now was the time to prove everything he had worked for. But before he could take his first step, Bakugo's voice sliced through the air again. Get ready to eat my dust, Deku, Bakugo muttered, his eyes gleaming with the fire of competition. Izuku clenched his jaw, feeling his resolve harden. This was his moment. He wasn't going to let Bakugo or anyone else throw him off his path. He had a goal, he had a dream, and nothing was going to stop him from achieving it. With one last deep breath, Izuku rushed forward, ready to face whatever the exam had in store. The gates of high buzzed with energy, a swirling tide of ambition and nerves. Izuku Midoriya stood among the hopefuls, his grip firm on the hilt of the blade at his side. The katana rested sheathed in an ornate black scabbard, its crimson markings barely visible in the morning light. This was Kajikiri, Shadow Cutter, the sword he had claimed on the island, a weapon forged for a purpose far greater than its elegant form suggested. As the crowd moved forward, Izuku adjusted the sword on his hip. He could feel the weight of his destiny pressing down on him, but it no longer crushed him. It grounded him, reminded him of how far he had come. Nearby, a sharp, familiar voice shattered his focus. Oi, Deku. Izuku turned to see Katsuki Bakugo stalking toward him, his crimson eyes filled with disdain. Bakugo's hands crackled faintly with explosive energy, but he kept them in his pockets. You think carrying some stupid sword is gonna make you stand out? This is a hero exam, not a samurai movie. Bakugo sneered, his smirk widening as he noticed the confident way Izuku held himself. This isn't about standing out, Bakugo, Izuku replied, his voice calm but firm. This sword is a part of me. And today, I'll show why I'm ready to be a hero. Bakugo's expression twisted into one of disbelief, then amusement. Ready? You. Don't make me laugh. You're just a loser trying to play dress up. I guess we'll see, Izuku said, brushing past him. Bakugo didn't stop him, but Izuku could feel his glare burning into his back. Inside the massive auditorium, the air buzzed with anticipation. Students sat in neat rows, their attention focused on a stage where a man with wild blonde hair and yellow-tinted glasses stood grinning. Present Mike, U.A.'s eccentric pro-hero, practically vibrated with enthusiasm. Welcome, everyone, to the U.A. entrance exam, he boomed, his voice echoing throughout the room. You're here to prove you've got what it takes to be the next generation of heroes. And we're gonna start with the practical exam. The crowd murmured with excitement and nervousness. Izuku leaned forward, listening closely. Present Mike gestured to a large screen behind him, which lit up with diagrams of 4 different types of robots. You'll face off against villain bots in a simulated cityscape. Each bot has a point value based on how tough they are, 1, 2, or 3 points. Destroy as many as you can to rack up your score. But watch out. There's a big, bad 0-pointer out there, and trust me, you don't want to mess with it unless you're feeling lucky. The students exchanged uneasy glances as Present Mike continued. Your goal is to score as many points as possible within the time limit. No dirty tricks, no sabotage, just pure, heroic action. Any questions? A hand shot up in the crowd. A tall boy with glasses and a rigid posture stood up. Excuse me, sir. You haven't explained the zero-pointer's role in detail. Is it merely an obstacle, or does it serve a strategic purpose in the exam? Present Mike grinned. Great question. The zero-pointer's there to test your decision-making. Focus on scoring points, and don't get distracted unless you're ready for a real challenge. Satisfied, the boy sat down, and Present Mike clapped his hands. All right. Get ready, future heroes, because it's time to show us what you've got. The simulated city was enormous, a sprawling maze of streets and buildings designed to mimic an urban environment. Students were divided into groups and assigned different starting zones. Izuku found himself standing in Zone C, surrounded by strangers who all looked ready to charge ahead the moment the gates opened. He adjusted Kajikiri at his side, his heart pounding with anticipation. His years of training had led him to this moment. He wasn't just here to pass, he was here to prove that he had the skill, strength, and resolve to stand alongside the best. The gates creaked open, and a loud buzzer signaled the start of the exam. Go! Izuku sprinted forward, his hand resting on the hilt of Kajikiri. Almost immediately, a one-point robot burst from an alleyway, its mechanical arms raised to strike. Izuku's eyes narrowed. With a single fluid motion, he drew Kajikiri and slashed. The blade cut cleanly through the robot's center, sparks flying as it collapsed in a heap of metal. The crowd of students nearby gasped. Some hesitated, staring at the katana in disbelief, while others pushed ahead to claim their own points. Izuku didn't pause. He moved through the city like a shadow, his sword a blur as he dismantled robots with precision. The blade was light and responsive, as if it were an extension of his body. A two-pointer charged him from behind, its spinning arms whirring dangerously. Izuku spun around, dodging its attack and slicing through its joints in one swift motion. The robot crumpled to the ground, and Izuku's score climbed higher. As the minutes ticked by, Izuku encountered tougher opponents. 3-point bots, towering and heavily armored, required strategy and multiple strikes to bring down. But with each encounter, his confidence grew. The lessons of the island, his battles against beasts and trials of endurance, had prepared him for this. The ground trembled, and a deafening roar echoed through the city. Students froze as the massive zero-pointer robot appeared, towering over the buildings like a skyscraper. Its shadow engulfed the streets, and its mechanical limbs crushed everything in its path. Time to run, someone shouted, and the students scattered. Izuku caught sight of the massive robot and stopped in his tracks. Unlike the others who fled, he studied the machine with calm precision. It was an obstacle, but not an insurmountable one. From the corner of his eye, he noticed a girl trapped beneath debris. Her ankle was pinned, her eyes wide with terror as the zero-pointer Izuku sprinted toward the towering zero-pointer. Its colossal frame blotting out the sun as it barreled into the testing arena. The ground shook violently with each step of the machine, and its glowing red eyes scanned the area with lifeless menace. Around him, examinees scattered like leaves in the wind, their cries of panic adding to the chaos. Despite the fear clawing at his chest, Izuku's resolve hardened. This was his moment, not just to prove himself to you, but to validate the years of grueling training and the legacy he now carried. With a sharp breath, he gripped the hilt of Kajikiri, the sleek black blade resting at his side. The sword seemed to hum in anticipation as Izuku drew it, the crimson etchings along its length pulsing faintly. This was no ordinary weapon, it was an extension of his will and the embodiment of his strength. The zero-pointer's massive arm rose, preparing to smash through a section of the arena. Izuku didn't hesitate. He darted forward, leaping onto a pile of debris for elevation. From there, he propelled himself higher, his movements fluid and calculated, until he landed on the robot's enormous arm. The machine's sensors locked onto him, its mechanical head swiveling with an audible whir. Its other arm swung toward him in a crushing arc, but Izuku anticipated the attack. He flipped backward, landing gracefully on the robot's shoulder as the arm passed harmlessly beneath him. "This is it," Izuku muttered, planting his feet firmly on the robot's metal plating. He raised Kajakiri, gripping the sword with both hands. The blade seemed to come alive, its crimson runes glowing brighter as energy coursed through it. The air around him grew heavy, charged with power. Kajakiri, Izuku shouted, the words imbued with both focus and determination. Shadow Fong Slash. He swung the sword in a powerful arc, and a wave of crimson energy erupted from the blade. The crescent-shaped slash tore through the air with a deafening roar, hurtling toward the zero-pointer's neck. The impact was instant and catastrophic, the energy cleaved through the metal like paper, severing the robot's head cleanly from its body. The colossal machine stood still for a heartbeat before its headless frame tilted backward, crashing to the ground with a thunderous impact. Dust and debris filled the air as silence fell over the arena, every examinee frozen in stunned awe. Izuku landed softly, rolling into a crouch before standing and sheathing Kajakiri in a smooth motion. The blade's glow dimmed, its job done. He turned to the rubble where the girl was trapped, the adrenaline in his veins replaced by urgency. He turned back to the girl, offering her a hand. Are you all right? The girl's hazel eyes widened as Izuku approached, her expression a mixture of fear and gratitude. My leg it's pinned, she said, her voice shaking but steady. Izuku scanned the debris. Her left leg was trapped beneath a heavy slab of concrete. He drew Kajakiri once more, its blade gleaming as he began cutting away the smaller pieces of rubble. His movements were precise, the sword slicing cleanly through the debris without risking further harm to the girl. Thank you, she said, her voice filled with awe. I thought I was done for. Izuku offered her a hand, helping her to her feet. She leaned on him for support, her weight light against his frame. Around them, the timer blared, signaling the end of the practical exam. You saved me and destroyed that thing, she said, glancing back at the fallen zero-pointer. Her eyes sparkled with a mix of wonder and admiration. You're incredible. Izuku scratched the back of his head. It was nothing. I just did what I had to. As the proctors began to gather the examinees, Izuku felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The trials he had endured on the island, the endless hours of training with Kajakiri, they had all led to this moment. And as he looked at the girl beside him, her freckled face brightened by the sunlight cutting through the settling dust, he felt something else, hope. He tightened his grip on Kajakiri's hilt. The road ahead would be long, but he was ready. For the first time, Izuku truly believed he could become a hero. As the buzzer sounded, signaling the end of the exam, Izuku exhaled deeply. The murmurs of the other students filled the air. Did you see that guy with the sword? He took down the zero-pointer like it was nothing. Who is he? Izuku adjusted Kajakiri at his side, his confidence growing. He had faced countless challenges on the island, and now, he had proven that he was ready for this next chapter of his journey. From a distance, Bakugo scowled, his fists clenched. TCH, Deku, what the hell have you been up to?